This is Peer Groups Part 4, Rejection, Bullying, and Victimization. Unpopular adolescents tend to fall into three categories. Aggressive, so those who have trouble controlling their aggression. Withdrawn, those who are withdrawn from the group. And those who are both aggressive and withdrawn. The origins of peer rejection in adolescence can often be traced to like an earlier period in the person's development. And in any case, rejection by peers is a significant source of stress for adolescents. We start to see some patterns of aggression that actually start in early childhood but continue on through adolescence. The first type is relational aggression. These are aimed This is any sort of aggression that's aimed at damaging another person's self-esteem or peer relationships. So things like ostracism or threats of ostracism, like you will be out of our group if blah, 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 blah. Cruel gossip is another one, or even something as simple as a facial expression of disdain. You know, you're like, don't even try it. That kind of look, right? Girls do display more of this type of aggression than boys. Girls direct this at other girls in general. Girls are more aware of it. They're more distressed by it. They're more often the victims of it. But both sexes will use this type of aggression. It's just girls use it more. There's actually another type of aggression that your book doesn't cover, but I wanted to mention it just to kind of cover both. And it's called retaliatory aggression. So this is aggression to get back at someone who has hurt you. Usually we see much more of this type of aggression in middle childhood than in adolescence, and we definitely see it pretty equally with both boys and girls. They will increase their use of this type of aggression as it gets reinforced from their peers, because peer groups tend to not see this one as too bad. Like, hey, you're going to get what you get, right? Karma. It's going to come back around at you. But parents, teachers, authority, they don't really love this kind of aggression. And I thought that it would probably be a good idea to at least mention it. Peer rejection and being unpopular definitely have negative consequences for adolescents' mental health and their psychological development. So things like depression, behavioral problems, academic difficulties, alcohol use, interpersonal difficulties, so meaning relating to another person, academic difficulties, and they can also misinterpret other people's actions as sometimes being hostile. Rejected, aggressive individuals, so those in that not only just rejected and unpopular, but also aggressive. These are individuals who are at risk of conduct problems and involvement in antisocial activity. Withdrawn, rejected children, these are people who are at risk of low self-esteem, depression, diminished social competence. And then those who are both in that third category that we talked about, these are the people who are at the absolute most risk. Oh, and by the way, speaking of that misinterpretation of another person's actions as hostile, that is usually more likely to appear in somebody who is aggressive than somebody who is not. Bullying. About 1/3 of all students have reported being physically bullied at school in the past year alone. And that might even be underreported. And this number is larger when we take into account those who feel like they've been victimized, which we'll discuss in the next slide. But I mean, this statistic is quite astonishing. Those who bully support other bullies. So I wrote bullying supports bullying. And what I mean is that those who are bullies are more likely to reinforce bullying behavior in other people when they do it as well, which then reinforces behavior in other people, which so on and so forth. And children and adolescents are exposed to bullies in two different ways. They're exposed to bullying by direct exposure, which means that they are the one that's being bullied, or maybe they are the one that's doing the bullying, and or, meaning it can happen both ways, they can have indirect exposure, which means they can watch somebody else get bullied. Students who are harassed by their classmates, this is what victimization is. And these students report a range of adjustment problems, which include things like low self-esteem, depression, suicide, sleep difficulties, academic difficulties, loneliness, problems with social skills, difficulty controlling negative emotions, anger issues, aggression issues, all of these things just from being victimized and harassed by somebody else. In some studies, these psychological problems have been shown to be the causes of victimization rather than the consequences, whereas in others, there's a clear evidence that victimization leads to subsequent problems. And some of these problems might even exist into adulthood. Unfortunately, victimization undermines the feelings of academic competence, academic performance, school attendance, and even school engagement. Many who report being victimized are also bullies to other people, which can lead to a whole host of other problems. And lastly, let's talk about cyberbullying. The term cyberbullying means harassment that happens in some electronic means, but researchers define this in a variety of different ways. Almost 35% of students have been the victim of physical bullying, while 15 to 20% have been cyberbullied. Both types of bullying affects victims and in similar ways, actually. Physical bullying has become less common over early adolescence, but cyberbullying becomes more common. A lot of times when you talk to an adult about cyberbullying, they think that it's an anonymous thing that happens, but that's not actually the case at all. Cyberbullying nowadays is much more direct. You know who it's coming from, and sometimes it can come from a whole clique of people. Conventional bullying or physical bullying tends to make an adolescent less popular, but what we find with the research is that cyberbullying seems to have the opposite effect. It can actually make some people more popular. Teenagers whose parents monitor their internet activity are less likely to be harassed by teenagers whose parents do not. But remember, going back to what we talked about in an earlier video, it's all about finding balance so they don't feel like they're being snooped on, but you're still keeping them safe. And that's going to conclude this video, and it's going to conclude this lecture.